name is Lauren, and this happened 2 summers ago when I was hiking the Barrens Trail in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. I want to give you some context about who I am before I get into it because it matters. I'm not someone who scares easily in the outdoors. I grew up camping with my family in the Catskills and the Poconos, and by the time I was in my mid-20s I'd done enough solo hiking to have a reliable sense of my own instincts. I know the difference between the fear that's just the woods being loud at night and the fear that's telling you something specific. I say this because everything I'm about to describe happened to someone who was paying attention and knew what she was looking at. The Barrens Trail runs about 50 miles through the pinelands. Dense pitch pine and scrub oak, sandy soil, dark cedar water in the streams. It's not a difficult trail technically, but it's remote in a way that catches people off guard. The Pine Barrens are right in the middle of the most densely populated corridor on the East Coast, and somehow you can be 10 miles in and feel like you've stepped into a different century. The quiet is different than anywhere else I've hiked. Not peaceful exactly. Just very, very still. I was doing a 3-day section, southbound, camping 2 nights out. I'd done my research, filed my itinerary with a friend, and started early on a Thursday morning in mid-July. The first day was perfect, good weather, good pace, the kind of hiking that empties your head. I made camp at a designated site around 6 in the evening, ate, read until dark, and fell asleep to the sound of whip-poor wills calling back and forth across the canopy. The second day was when I started noticing things. I'm going to be precise about the sequence because precision matters here. Around 10 in the morning, maybe 3 miles into my second day, I stopped to check my map at a junction where a side trail branched off toward a cedar bog. Nothing unusual. I marked my position and kept moving. About a mile later I heard something behind me on the trail. Not dramatic, just the sound of footsteps on sand. Rhythmic, deliberate. I turned around. The trail was empty as far back as I could see, which in that section was maybe 80 feet before a bend. I stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing. I filed it under a branch falling or an animal moving through the scrub and kept going. An hour after that I stopped to filter water at a stream crossing. While I was crouched at the bank I had the specific feeling of being watched that I'd felt twice before in my life. Once when I surprised a black bear on a trail in Pennsylvania, and once when a stranger had followed me out of a subway station at 2 a.m. Both times I'd been right. The feeling has a particular quality that I've never been able to describe cleanly except that it changes the way the air feels. Something that was ambient becomes focused. I stood up slowly and looked around. The scrub on both sides of the stream, the trail ahead, the trail behind. Nothing visible. Nothing moving. I kept going. At my lunch stop I sat on a down pitch pine with my back against the trunk and ate facing the direction I'd come from. Old hiking habit, sitting with your back to something open and your eyes on the trail. I ate slowly and watched. About 20 minutes in, at the far end of the visible section of trail, something moved in the scrub about 10 feet off the path. Not dramatically, just a shift, the way vegetation moves when something large passes through it. Then nothing. I told myself deer. The Pine Barrens have deer. That's a normal explanation, and it was probably accurate. I made camp that second night at another designated site, a clearing with a fire ring and a bare box. I set up quickly, ate, and built a small fire more out of habit than need. It was warm and I didn't particularly need the heat, but fire is a kind of company when you're alone. I sat with it until around 9 and then let it die down and got into my tent. I slept lightly. That's not unusual for me on the second night of a trip. The novelty of the first night wears off and the body starts registering the unfamiliarity of sleeping on the ground with more detail. I woke twice, both times to nothing, and fell back asleep quickly. The third time I woke it was just after 2 a.m. by my watch. There was someone outside my tent. I know how that sounds. I know the brain fills in gaps at 2 a.m. in a way it doesn't at noon. I lay still for a moment and tried to assess. What I heard was breathing, not a sound I'd describe as breathing except that it had the rhythm and quality of it, slow and deliberate, maybe 8 feet from the tent wall on the south side. Closer than a deer would come to a campsite with a recent fire. Closer than anything with good instincts would come. I lay completely still. My hand was on my bear spray in its side pocket the way it always was at night. I waited. The breathing stopped. Then after a silence that lasted maybe 2 minutes there was the sound of footsteps, slow ones, moving away from the tent, toward the tree line. Then nothing. Just the whip-poor wills again, starting back up after a gap, which told me something had silenced them. I did not sleep again that night. I lay in my tent until first light and then packed up camp in under 15 minutes, which is faster than I have ever packed before or since. On the trail out I moved quickly. Not running on a sandy trail with a loaded pack is how people turn ankles, but at the edge of my comfortable pace. I kept checking behind me. The trail was always empty when I looked. But twice I heard the footsteps again, behind me, matching my pace and stopping when I stopped, and the second time I stopped and yelled into the trees that I knew someone was there and I had bear spray and a personal locator beacon and that I'd already activated it and given my GPS coordinates to a contact who would respond if I didn't check in. The last part was a lie. I hadn't activated the beacon. But I said it clearly and loudly and the footsteps didn't resume after that. I reached the trailhead 3 hours later and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could make my hands steady enough to start the engine. I reported it to the Park Service. They took a report and said there had been a few similar accounts from hikers in that section over the past 2 seasons, someone, or something, following people on the trail and disappearing when challenged. No identification, no physical evidence, no resolution. I've hiked since then. Different trails, different regions, nothing in the Barrens. What stays with me isn't the breathing outside the tent, that could, if I work hard enough at the rational explanation, have been an animal. What stays with me is the footsteps that matched my pace. Deer don't do that. Bears don't do that. There is a very short list of things that follow a person down a trail at the same speed and stop when that person stops. I still have the bear spray. I keep it in my pack whenever I go out. But I check the side pocket now before I zip the tent closed each night, not just at bedtime. I check it twice. Some habits start on the trail and come home with you. My name is Grant and I grew up in South Jersey, 20 minutes from the edge of the Pine Barrens. I want to say that up front because it matters for what I'm about to tell you. I'm not someone who wandered in from outside and got spooked by unfamiliar terrain. I spent most of my childhood in and around those woods. I know what they look like in every season and I know what they sound like at night. I know the difference between what belongs there and what doesn't. What happened to me happened on Bird Mill Road. If you're from South Jersey, you probably already know that name. If you're not, here's the context. Bird Mill Road is a stretch of back road in the Pine Barrens that runs through a particularly flat and desolate section of pine and scrub, dead-ending near an old drainage area. It's the kind of road that people talk about. Ghost stories about a boy who was killed by a hit-and-run driver, whose spirit is said to appear at the end of the road. Local teenagers drive out there on Halloween and dare each other to get out of the car. I grew up hearing those stories the way everyone does in small towns near places that have reputations, with the comfortable skepticism of someone who's been there in daylight and found nothing. I was 22 and had recently moved back home after 2 years away at school. I was out late on a Friday with a couple of friends, the kind of night that doesn't have a plan, just ends up wherever it ends up. Somebody brought up Bird Mill Road the way they always brought up Bird Mill Road, as a kind of dare wrapped in casual suggestion. My friend Derek had a newer car with good headlights. There were 4 of us. We figured why not. We drove out around 11:30. The road narrows as you get away from the highway, the trees pressing in from both sides until the headlights are the only light source and the pine canopy closes overhead. Derek killed the radio about halfway and without being asked. Nobody said anything about that. We reached the dead end, did the full local ritual, engine off, lights off, sat in the dark for a few minutes making jokes that were mostly nervous energy. Nothing happened, as it never does when you're actually out there. After maybe 5 minutes someone said let's go and we were all relieved to say yeah. Derek started the engine and turned us around. We were about a quarter mile back toward the highway when his headlights caught something on the right shoulder of the road. A figure. standing completely still at the very edge of the tree line, facing the road. Derek hit the brakes. All four of us looked. A man, or the outline of one, which is all you ever really see in headlights on a rural road at night, standing absolutely still in the high beams. No movement, no reaction to the light, just standing there at the edge of the road facing directly at the car. Derek said, "What the hell?" Someone in the back said, "Just drive." He didn't drive. We all sat there for a few seconds that felt much longer, staring at this figure that was not moving at all. Then the headlights went out. Not the engine was still running. Just the headlights, which had been on automatic since Derek turned the key. They went off completely for about 4 seconds. Total darkness. And in those 4 seconds I heard a sound outside the car that I have never been able to categorize correctly, not a voice, not an animal sound, something with the quality of movement that was very close and very fast. Then the headlights came back on. The shoulder was empty. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Derek accelerated and we drove out of there without discussing it. The highway appeared ahead of us and the streetlights and the normal world reasserted itself, and we found a diner and ordered food. We barely ate and talked around what had happened rather than about it. It's easier to do that than you'd think. When something genuinely unsettling occurs, the brain reaches for any available frame that makes it smaller, and we were all reaching hard. We came up with the reasonable explanations in the diner. Somebody on a late walk, maybe a local, who stepped back into the trees. Headlights flickering on an older car system. The sound was probably a deer moving fast through the scrub. All of it possible, none of it satisfying. I've thought about those 4 seconds of darkness many times since then. The thing that I keep coming back to is the sound during them. It had the quality of something moving from the shoulder of the road to the car. Not approaching the car from a distance, crossing the space between the shoulder and the door in those 4 seconds. And the sound stopped when the lights came back on. 3 weeks later I was at work, a convenience store on Route 9, late shift, when a man came in around 1 a.m. I registered him the way I registered all late customers, a quick read. He was tall, in dark clothes, something off about his effect that I couldn't name. He bought a water, looked at me for a moment without speaking, and left. I don't know if it was the same man from the road. I have no way to know that. But I went home after my shift and sat in my car in the driveway and thought about it for a long time. About the way he'd looked at me in the store. About the stillness of it, the same total stillness as the figure on the shoulder of Burnt Mill Road. I moved to Philadelphia 8 months later. Different reasons, entirely. New job, better opportunities. I don't have any evidence that what happened on that road had anything to do with it. But I haven't driven that road since. And every once in a while on a dark road somewhere else, when the headlights are the only light and the trees are close on both sides, I find myself watching the shoulders. Both sides. Continuously. Not because I expect to see anything. Just because I know now that when the lights go out, for seconds is long enough. My name is Isaac, and this happened 3 years ago when I was 26, on a camping trip in Wharton State Forest in the Pine Barrens with 4 of my friends. I want to describe who we were before I describe what happened because it matters for understanding why we stayed as long as we did. We were not inexperienced. My friend Priya had done backcountry camping in the Rockies and the Adirondacks. Marcus, who organized the trip, had been coming to Wharton since college and knew the permit system, the water sources, the campsites that didn't flood. I'd done weekend camping enough times to know the basics. We went in with the right gear, a stock cooler, a clear plan. 5 competent adults in their mid-20s who had every reason to believe nothing was going to happen. We set up camp on a Friday evening at a site Marcus had used before. A clearing along the Mullica River, flat ground, fire ring, good tree cover without being too closed in. The river was low and dark, the water stained that particular tea color you only get in the pinelands from the cedar tannins. We had 3 tents, a folding table, the works. By the time the fire was going and we'd eaten, the Pine Barrens were doing what they do best, settling into a particular quiet that feels older and thicker than the quiet in other places. My friend Leah said it felt like the forest was holding its breath. I remember thinking that was exactly right. The first night passed without incident. Saturday was good. We canoed a section of the river, explored a nearby ghost town that Marcus had read about, spent the afternoon the way you're supposed to spend a Saturday in a forest. Nobody mentioned feeling anything off. We went to bed late, happy, tired in the right way. It started Saturday night at around 1 a.m. I was asleep in the tent I shared with Marcus. I woke up to what I thought was rain, a pattering on the tent fly that had the rhythm of light rain. It lasted about 30 seconds and stopped. I lay there half awake processing it. No other rain sounds. No sound of wind. The fly had that particular silence it has when nothing is touching it. I decided I'd dreamed it and went back to sleep. In the morning Priya told me she'd heard the same thing. Same time, she thought, same duration, same sudden stop. She'd assumed it was acorns or pine cones falling from the trees above. I said I thought the same thing. We moved on. Saturday night was also when Marcus noticed the footprints. He found them Sunday morning when he went to get water from the cooler. A set of prints in the soft soil along the edge of our clearing, bare feet, human, adult size, coming from the tree line to the north and circling the perimeter of our campsite before going back into the trees on the same side. Not passing through. Circling. Like someone had walked the full circumference of our camp while we slept and gone back the way they came. We looked at them for a while without saying much. Then Marcus said there was probably a simple explanation, a local who sometimes camped in the area, someone who'd walked through and been curious about our fire ring. Priya said bare feet in the pine barrens at night seemed unusual. He said not everyone wore shoes. We none of us had a better answer, so we let it sit. I want to be clear about the mood that day because it matters. We didn't pack up. We didn't panic. We talked about it the way you talk about something that concerns you when you don't want to be the person who overreacts. We were all doing that calculation, is this the kind of thing that means we should leave or the kind of thing that sounds worse than it is? We decided to stay for Sunday night as planned and leave Monday morning. Sunday night I didn't sleep well. I lay in the tent listening to the forest in a way I hadn't been on the previous nights. The whippoorwills, the frogs from the river, the occasional sound of something moving in the scrub, normal sounds, all of them, but I was processing each one differently now. Around midnight I heard footsteps on the far side of camp. Slow. Deliberate. The specific crunching sound of someone walking on dry pine needles, which is different from any animal movement I know. I woke Marcus. He heard it too. We lay still. The footsteps moved slowly around the north side of camp and stopped somewhere near the tree line. We stayed still for what felt like 10 minutes but was probably 2. Then nothing. Silence. The forest sounds resumed. In the morning we found the footprints again. Same bare feet, same path, slightly different route that brought them 2 feet closer to the tents than the night before. We packed up Sunday morning instead of waiting for Monday. Nobody argued about it. We did it quickly and efficiently, the way 5 people pack who are all thinking the same thing and not saying it. Priya found something when she was breaking down her tent, a small bundle of sticks, 4 of them, tied together with what looked like dried plant material, placed upright in the soil at the base of the tent stake closest to the tree line. We hadn't seen it when we set up. It had been placed there sometime during our stay. We showed it to each other and then left it where it was. None of us wanted to touch it, which tells you something about the state of our collective nerves at that point. On the drive out, Marcus said it was probably a local kid who camped in the area and was trying to spook us. Priya said she thought it was someone who'd been watching us from the tree line since we arrived and we just hadn't known. Leah didn't say anything. She was looking out the window at the trees as we drove, and she stayed that way until we reached the highway. We filed a report with the state forest office when we got home. The ranger who took the call was polite and asked if we'd felt physically threatened. We said no. He said there had been other reports of campsite disturbances in that section and that they'd look into it. He said sometimes people lived in the forest for extended periods and kept to themselves but got curious about campers. He said it in a way that was meant to be reassuring. It wasn't. I've camped since then. Different forests, different states. I still enjoy it. But I sleep with my boots on now, which I never did before. And I always set the tent with the door facing the tree line, which is counterintuitive if you're thinking about privacy but makes more sense if you're thinking about what you want to be able to see. Marcus still organizes camping trips. He hasn't suggested Wharton again and nobody has asked him to. Leah doesn't camp anymore. She told me a few months later that she'd looked up the history of that section of the forest and found forum posts going back years from people who described similar experiences at campsites along the Molucca. Bare footprints, sounds at night, objects placed near tents. Always the same behavior pattern. Always someone who stayed just outside the visible perimeter. She said she'd wanted to tell us about it before the trip but hadn't wanted to be the person who ruined it by bringing up campfire stories. I told her I wished she had. She said she did too. 3 accounts from the same forest. None of them have explanations. If these stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next ones are already waiting.